Okay, well, let's get started. And I just want to introduce our guest speaker briefly and thank those who are able to join us, whether they're on campus today or from the community. We thank you so much. Dr. Bruce Fraedrich is helping us today as part of our 9/11 remembrance to really tell a very special and very particular story that I just find fascinating, and I hope you will as well. And it's really the story of bringing life back to this location of where the Twin Towers went down and how the restructuring of that space and the reimagining and re-envisioning of that space was done. And he was intimately involved with this, with the company that he worked with at the time, and I'll let him share those details as he expands on it in his presentation. But I hope you find this type of remembrance and tribute to 9/11 important as well, because this memorial and museum that has been rebuilt on this space is really sacred ground. And with folks like Bruce being able to assist with the reconstruction of the space, we have something that will last hopefully for generations, and many Americans will be able to revisit and go back to the space over and over again. So today we'll talk about this landscaping at the into the details about how that happened. If you're joining us, whether on campus or off campus, please share questions and comments in the chat space. The presentation will go about 35-40 minutes or so, and then we'll take questions at the end. And we know folks are on lunch hour, so we'll try and get things moved along and stick within about an hour. Joining us, and I'll turn it over to Dr. Bruce Fraedrich. Thank you so much for joining us, Bruce.
Thank you, Dr. Schechter. I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you a little bit about 9/11. I'll talk to you about our company's, Bartlett Tree Experts company's involvement in that, as well as some of my involvement in it. We were one small cog in a very big wheel. There was a lot of moving parts in the redevelopment of the World Trade Center site, and we played a relatively small role. I want to put it in perspective. So there was a lot of people involved with this, with the redevelopment, and Bartlett was one of those people, and I was one of the people with Bartlett who was involved in this project. Bartlett is a commercial company. We do residential commercial tree care, mostly work after planting, and we're a national company, actually now an international company. We have offices in most major cities throughout the United States, and also in Canada and in the UK, in England. We have quite a large operation there. So we do residential commercial tree care, and we are a commercial company. So with 9/11, almost from the beginning, there was a lot of discussion of what was going to become of this site. 9/11 was really a turning point, a seminal moment, a pivotal moment for most anyone who was a citizen of the United States at that time. Is one of those moments that we shared collectively. I can remember vividly where I was when John Kennedy got assassinated, when we first stepped out on the moon. I remember that moment. I remember exactly where I was when 9/11 occurred. And it's something we shared collectively as a nation, and it's something that has changed the way we live, way we look at air travel, look at a lot of different things today in terms of our security. It really was a point where we realized that terrorism wasn't something that happened abroad, that it could happen everywhere. And we continue to have experienced those terrorist events within our country. A lot of discussion from the very beginning on what was going to become of this site. This is some of the most expensive real estate in the world. The World Trade Center footprints was about 16 acres, but there's a lot of land around that was also impacted by the collapse of those buildings. So a massive amount of destruction that occurred and what was going to become of this land. The owners, the people who own this, manage this land, certainly was looking at commercial development again, and a very small, perhaps, memorial. The families of the victims, though, looked at it very, very differently. Many of the victims were never recovered. This is their final resting place. So the families really wanted a memorial to be built to the remembrance of the event and the remembrance of the people who died there. And ultimately, they got their way. So much of the footprint of the World Trade Centers, the Twin Towers, were established as the 9/11 memorial. The site was actually cleaned up in a record amount of time. By the spring of 2012, much of the debris was already hauled off. Much of the debris was removed. All the victims were recovered at that time who were going to be recovered. So there was discussions right away to build a memorial. In the city of New York, the redevelopment of the downtown, they put it out to bid to accept designs competitively for the redesign of that site and the design of a memorial. So this was a competitive process. Many designs were submitted for consideration. And the design that was picked was by Michael Arid. He's an architect that actually, he's an Israeli-born resident of New York City. He was living in Manhattan and witnessed the collapse of the towers at the time of the event, and was thinking right away about a design for a memorial. And he actually was an architect for the city of New York. He designed public housing. He also, at the time of the attacks, he was designing a firehouse, actually. So he was thinking about the design from the very start. And what he had envisioned, you can see in the upper portion, was basically a large fountain, twin fountains, you'll see in a minute, that was the footprints of the two towers. And these fountains had a waterfall feature, a twin waterfall feature, as I'll show in a minute. And the viewing for the fountains and the viewing of the victims' names would be seen from below. People would actually walk down to view the fountains from beneath grade, from beneath street level. And behind them would be walls that were in place with the names of the victims on the walls. So he envisioned it as very stark. He didn't want anything else on there. He wanted kind of a stark reminder of what happened. He saw water being used in the feature as a indication of renewal, okay? The city of New York saw things differently. It was too stark for them. The people who submitted, were responsible for selecting design, thought it was too stark. They wanted something living out there to show renewal. So the other issue with the original design was that nothing could be placed below ground. Everything had to be up on level grade for security reasons. They didn't want anyone to walk down into a below ground area, below grade level. It would be more difficult to secure that type of environment. So everything had to be put up on grade. So the Michael Arid got together with a landscape architecture firm, Peter Walker Associates. They're out of San Francisco, one of the most renowned landscape architecture firms in the country. And they did the actual landscape design on it. And they actually created a forest of trees that surround these fountains. And again, the trees, again, were put in place or planted to indicate the renewal of the site. It also is a real good addition to the site from a standpoint of a visitor experience. If you've ever been in downtown Manhattan in the wintertime, it's an extremely cold place. Wind comes through off the harbor there, and it gets funneled through these buildings, and it can be a very inhospitable place to walk or visit any site. In the summertime, it's baking hot. So these trees were quite a plus in terms of the visitor experience, not only the design experience. So this is basically the conceptual look at it. Twin fountains, you can see the fountains, the water falls away and then disappears into a second fountain. I'll get to that in a minute. So in the center of those fountains is another waterfall that falls away, and people who stand at the edge of the fountains cannot see the bottom of that second waterfall. So you can see the top waterfall and then the second waterfall down below. First waterfall falls about 30 feet. The second one falls about 20 feet to the bottom, but that bottom isn't visible. The building that you see in the center surrounded by trees, that's the museum. So the museum was opened a few years later than the plaza, which was opened up on the 10th anniversary, 2011 of it. The reflecting pools, the fountains are the centerpiece. That first waterfall is 30 feet. The second one is about 20 feet. Can't see the bottom of that second waterfall. That is the reflecting absence. So the name of this design is reflecting absence. And that second waterfall, because you can't see the bottom of it, the water just disappears into a void. That's the absence, which Michael Arid was discussing. So you can see in the top photograph how the fountains were built and how they're designed. And on the second, the bottom photograph is the completed fountain that is operational now. Okay. The names of the victims are all inscribed on bronze parapets. And these parapets surround each of the fountains, both fountains, twin fountains. Each of these fountains are an acre in size. That's the exact footprint of the twin towers that were originally present on the site. So each of those towers were a little over 200 by 200, a full acre. And these fountains are the largest man-made fountains in North America. I don't know where there might be a larger one. The names around these fountains, each one of these fountains are parapets, raised parapets, bronze parapets, and they have the names inscribed of all the victims of not only the Twin Towers, 9/11, but also the Pentagon and also Flight 93. So the people who died in Shanksville, Pennsylvania in Flight 93 in that crash, they're there as well. There's also, I think, 9 names from a 1993 attack on the Twin Towers. So most people forget about that, but this is not the first time that terrorists have attacked the Twin Towers. In 1993, there was attack on there was a car bomb in the basement garage of one of the towers that was ignited. and it killed, I believe, 9 people and injured quite a few. So the names of those victims are also inscribed on these parapets that surround these fountains or pools. Okay. So that the names on those parapets are organized basically by affiliation with who people were working with at the time of the attacks, who they basically died with. So they're organized by the flights, people on the airlines, the world, and the people who died in the World Trade Centers are listed by the organization, the business that they were working with, or their affiliation there. The firefighters, the police who passed away, died in this, were organized by the battalions, the organizations that they were working with at the time. So there was consideration there. Some people were related in those twin towers, weren't working with one another, but were related. Husband and wife, parent and child, that sort of thing. And at the request of the family, you could be listed together. So there were some exceptions made where families asked for people to be grouped together by relation. So that has occurred within here. They made consideration for that. The memorial is actually below ground because of security reasons. You can screen people to get into the memorial, to get into the museum rather. You have to go through security. There's same thing you would go through with an airport, so they can manage the visitors to the actual museum. So that is actually below ground. It's actually below these fountains. The museum is the only portion of the 9/11 site that is there is a charge for. So you can visit the plaza, but for the museum, they do charge an entry fee for the museum. I had the opportunity for the people who worked on the 9/11 memorial. They opened it up to workers prior to the opening of the museum. So I got an opportunity to visit the museum before it actually opened to the public. And you could easily spend 4, 5, 6 hours going through the museum. It is extremely emotional. I spent about 2 hours there, and that's about all I could take. The landscape design, the actual design of the memorial, it's developed with sustainability in mind as much as possible, as much as any landscape can be sustainable in Lower Manhattan. This one is. It's a very simple design as well. I'll get into that in a minute. But for example, all the water that is used in the fountains is captured on site. So all the runoff, when it rains, it's all collected, stored, treated, and used in the fountain. So as not to use water that could be used for other purposes. The design of the site, the actual design, growing these trees, is also a very sustainable design. It was designed for these trees to reach maturity. So given the fact that these trees are growing basically with no native soil, the design for the space for these trees will allow them to reach 60, 70 feet of mature size. So this site is maturing just like a forest would mature. So the living landscape is comprised of a single species, 400 swamp white oaks. Is actually, with the surrounding sidewalks that were planted outside the memorial, is a total of 450 swamp white oaks. They required it to be native, urban tolerant, and resistant. So swamp white oak doesn't have a real sexy name to it, but the fact that they selected a species that is tolerant of swamp conditions also makes it very tolerant of urban conditions. It tolerates soils with very low oxygen levels, very tough urban tree. It is also very resistant to pests. So it's not a very good idea to go with one single species. A monoculture of the same species opens up to concerns with pest problems and loss of a given species to something that's unexpected. But again, there's a reason they selected, I'll get into that in a second, but there's a reason they selected one single species. Beyond that, there's turf beds there, some turf beds, some ivy beds there. And there's one other tree on site. It's a Callery pear, often terms called the Bradford pear. I'll get into that a little bit later too. That was a survivor tree. So the landscape really stresses simplicity, and that's the reason for one species. So the designer of the landscape and the architect, Michael Arad, did not want a very busy landscape. They wanted something that was subdued, serene, so they used one single species. The stone walkways there, the stone benches, it's all one type of stone. They didn't use different materials. They didn't want it busy. They wanted all to look the same. There's a light pole. I think you might be able to see it on the right-hand side of the screen. I don't see it. But the light pole there, the security lights, look exactly like the stem of the tree. Colored the same, blends right in. You wouldn't know there's a light pole there unless you really look for it. So the whole design is meant for simplicity, to give a non-complicated look to it, to give it a serene, peaceful appearance. So they didn't want anything busy. That's the reason for the single species that was used. The trees were called for at least 8 inches in diameter, caliper growth near the base, 25 feet tall, and had to be a clear stem for at least 12 feet. And they had to be healthy at transplanting. So from day one, when they put out on the site, they have to look like that picture right there. That is day one. That is when the site was just the day or two before the site was opened up. That they wanted every single tree to be uniform, and they wanted uniformity to provide that peaceful look that they were after. And they wanted them to appear healthy. The high crown, the 12 feet of clearance was necessary. They had to go in with big trees to provide that 12 feet of clearance in order for security. So there's a lot of cameras out there, and they needed the clearances for the surveillance cameras. So that's one reason they picked very large trees to be transplanted out. And again, they did not want these trees to appear stressed. They wanted them to appear uniform. So that is one of the challenges, is when trees are transplanted, root system is lost and they're going to appear stressed. And oaks are particularly sensitive to stress following transplanting. So how do you have a large tree transplanted onto site to look healthy from the very beginning? So that is a challenge. And what the specs called for is those trees had to be transplanted first to containers, very large containers. And these trees could undergo transplant establishment after transplant in a nursery type setting in large boxes full of soil that they could then regenerate a new root system for. So when they were placed on site, they would appear very healthy. So this project actually began 5 years prior, in 2006, 5 years prior to when the anticipated opening of the plaza was going to be. The opening up of the 9/11 Plaza and Museum was planned for the 10th anniversary. So the planning and the actual development of these trees actually started in 2006. So when the bid specs were designed and let to release for bid, we looked at them. Bartlett Tree looked at them, and we were hesitant to bid on this project because we just don't do a lot of transplanting. Our forte is caring for the trees after planting. So we partnered with another organization, Environmental Design. And Environmental Design is a Texas-based company. And what they do is move big trees. And when I say move big trees, that tree in the lower corner is one that they're moving. They can move fully mature trees. This tree that they're moving is about 3.5 feet in diameter and about 75 feet tall. And they have no problem moving large trees. Their forte is not tree care. They don't really know how to take care of trees. They move big objects. They're a group of engineers is basically who they are. So we partnered with them because we were able to care for these trees once they were transplanted into the boxes, and we could grow them to health again, return them to health, and then they could take over and actually move them onto the site. Once they were onto the site, they had to be maintained. Part of the contract is they had to be maintained for 2 years. And then we were right there to maintain them. So Bartlett has a large presence in the New York City area. One of our largest offices is actually Manhattan. So we had a large presence in the Northeast. Our company started in the Northeast. It's a Stamford, Connecticut-based company. So we had a lot of personnel there, which to take care of these trees was important. And then Environmental Design, being a Texas-based company, they struggled in order for the care aspect of it. They didn't really have the expertise of the personnel. So this was a good marriage between the two companies. We were able to care for the plants. Environmental Design was very comfortable with moving big plants. So we did this on a joint cooperative partnership, worked out extremely well. Bartlett Environmental Design were the winning bids on this project. So we were responsible for growing these trees, transplanting these trees, and the aftercare of these trees. So these are 450 swamp white oaks. It was selected from 7 different nurseries on the East Coast. So they came from as far away as Western Pennsylvania to Maryland to New Jersey. Some of them came out of New Jersey. They were all collected. Oversized root balls were first cut on these trees, and then they were moved to one site in central New Jersey. They were first put into the ground. Some work was done on the root system. Some work was done to prune these trees initially to get a better structure for these trees initially. And then boxes were built. These were 8 by 8 foot boxes, 42 inches high. 450 of these boxes were built to accommodate the trees. So once the boxes were complete, the trees were moved one by one, filled with a designed soil. Soil scientists actually spec'd out a very detailed soil to grow these trees in. Irrigation was added to each of these trees. So each tree had its own irrigation system that was monitored and regulated by moisture sensors. So as the soil dried out, more water was added. Fairly sophisticated design. A mobile office was set up on a site. The site was about 10 acres in size to accommodate the 450 trees. Weather station was present at the site. A webcam was installed. So there's a lot of different people involved in this project. So people wanted to go look at their trees in this nursery. There was a webcam where they could log in and look at their trees anytime they wanted to. an inventory was established and a web-based inventory program was established. So each one of these trees was, details about it were recorded, put into an inventory program, and that was posted on a website. So people could track the health of these plants, the growth of these plants. They could go look at them with a webcam, so forth. There was 18 different public and private entities that were involved with the creation of 9/11. So there was a lot of fingers in the pie. There was a lot of input on this project, especially at the beginning. So this really helped organize how the plants were performing. Each one had an inventory tag. Each one was identified where it was in the nursery. Photographs were taken and updated of the trees twice a year and posted on the website. There was evaluations of the trees done in terms of height, diameters, growth, appearance, so forth. That was all recorded and available for people who were involved in the project. So the trees were watered, fertilized constantly. The whole idea of them is to recover from the transplant stress. So they were very intensively managed, and growth was promoted as much as possible to get these trees up to size. So they were about 6-inch caliper in diameter when we first moved them into these boxes. And then by the time they moved out, most of them were 8, 9, 10 inches in caliber, considerably larger. So the whole goal was to increase the size of these plants, the growth of these plants as much as possible. These were grown above ground in winter. And what's true about all plants is the above ground portions of the plant are much more sensitive to low temperature injury than the above ground. So the below ground is more sensitive to low temperatures. And since these were being grown in New Jersey above ground, no one was quite sure of what the effects of low temperatures would be, whether we would get root loss, whether those low temperatures would kill the root system. So the original specs called for surrounding these containers with hay bales during the winter time. So hay bales would have to be brought in, stacked around each one of these trees in the fall, and then in the spring, the hay bales removed. So that was going to be 60, 70 hay bales per tree, 450 trees. That's going to be a very labor-intensive, expensive project. So we came up with the idea of using styrofoam panels. So these are 8 inches styrofoam panels that surround each one of these 8x8 panels that surround each one of these containers every winter. So what we could do is set up these styrofoam panels and then store them during the summer, take them down. It was easy to move the panels around, not so easy moving hay bales. So that was one of the more interesting or weird things about this project. So here's the 450 trees in place. The main body of the trees that you see in the center here, this long row here, that's the main ones going out in the plaza. This is an additional 50 that were added after the fact that were used along the streets. And the original design, the original design called for sweet gum in there as well. So they wanted some fall color. Swamp white oaks don't have much fall color. So they got the idea they'd use sweet gum trees to add fall color. But then someone found out about sweet gum balls, and they decided that they didn't want the plaza littered with sweet gum balls, which I found kind of amusing. So over here is the sweet gums. They got relegated to the outer periphery. They were never used at the 9/11 memorial, but they were sent out to Shanksville. So there's a memorial out in Shanksville, Pennsylvania to Flight 93. And most of those Sweecum are living happily now in Pennsylvania, and they don't complain about them out there. Projected date of the planting was in the fall of 2008. So what we envisioned is those trees would stay in the holding area for 2.5 years, and then be moved out, and the memorial would start to be planted at that date. In reality, everything got delayed. They were way behind on development of the plaza, the fountains, and so forth. There was a lot of cost overruns, a lot of discussions with between the groups in terms of getting the completion on track. So the actual start date on the planting was not until 2010, about 2 years after the original. So it gave us 1 year to plant 450 trees and complete it before opening day on September 11th. So it was completed by September 11th, but it was no small feat. These trees were moved into place 2 at a time on tractor trailer trucks. They were that large. So these were stacked 2 by 2 on tractor trailers. They were left in the container. What you see is metal sides being placed on the containers just to make sure they held them in place. So after 4 years in these wood boxes, those wood boxes started to get a little bit compromised. So metal casings were developed and put in place temporarily to transport these up to the 9/11 site. So these trees were grown in central New Jersey. That was according to spec. It had to be within 100 miles of the city, the nursery site. So these were in central New Jersey and had to be moved about 30 miles, 2 by 2, up to New Jersey. This was a big deal. We were surprised at how people responded to planting the trees, the initial plantings, the first ones that went in sight. When the first trees were brought up, it went across central New Jersey to Staten Island and across the Verrazano Narrows Bridge, which connects Staten Island to Brooklyn. So these were as they moved across the parkways and bridges, each town had their own police escorts. So it would be escorted by police. Some of the fire departments joined in with the initial trees moving across to Manhattan. So they had police and fire escort the whole way in. When they crossed the Verrazano Narrows, which is a body of water that separates Brooklyn and Staten Island, there were fireboats down in the Narrows, and they were streaming water across, didn't go across the bridge, but through the air to signal the transport of these trees. So it really caught us off guard. We didn't expect that kind of response out of strictly a tree planting, but it was interesting from the construction workers on the site to the Teamsters who brought these trees in, police, fire, civic officials. This was a big deal to them. So the trees are very much a big part of this whole design. For the actual design of the landscape, the trees had to be set in first. They had to be planted first. And then the rest of the plaza was designed around them. So these trees were either craned into place, or there was a special piece of equipment that was designed where they couldn't crane them to the position to bring them into place and set them into the planting holes. Once they're set into the planting holes, everything else was designed around them. Remember, there is no natural soil here. All the soil was brought in. It was specified, mixed, and brought in on site. What's below What's below the plaza here is either a museum or it's a railway station. It's the transit station. Below that, there is rock. There hasn't been soil on this site, native soil on this site, for probably 150 years. It's been heavily developed for that length of time. So the trees that are being brought in, everything had to be artificially created. The soil spaces, and then the infrastructure for the plaza is actually built around them. That's the sustainable design. So if you look at the center of this right in here, those are the first trees that are being placed into the site. Okay. Now everything else is being built around them. So all these soil spaces in here are interconnected. And the pavement that you see here is suspended. You can see it's suspended up above the soil area. So all the soil space is interconnected. It's a shared space, and all the pavement is suspended up above the soil area. So there is no compaction. They have plenty of room to grow. So here you can see the space in here. The pavement is going to be placed on top of these metal plates, and these are all connected to a vent system. So here is another planting site, which is going to be covered in this case with turf or with ivy. So here you can see the interconnected spaces. Between these spaces are tunnels that run through here. All right, and those tunnels carry the irrigation, they carry the electrical conduits, so it can be serviced. So we don't have to dig up the plaza in order to service irrigation or electrical conduits or anything else that is needed on the plaza. These, this what you see right here, these hoses that you see right here, that isn't irrigation, that's actually air. So there's a system of ductwork that connects into the planting spaces that connects back to elevators in the high-rise buildings. So when the elevators move up and down, it compresses the air, forces it through the ducts, and it disperses it into the planting strips. So there's air exchange in those planting strips to keep the soil well oxygenated, the root system alive. So they literally thought of everything in terms of designing the site to provide the plant with water, air, nutrients are all provided through a drip irrigation system now. So pretty much the needs of these trees are being met with this design. Very innovative design. So that's the sustainable aspect of it. It is designed for these trees to grow for another 60 feet, another 75, 80 years. There's one other tree on site, and that was a survivor tree. So in the spring of 2012, when these buildings, the last of these buildings were being removed, the rubble was being removed. There at the bottom, it was in the spring, at the bottom of the rubble was a tree that was broken up pretty well, but it was beginning to sprout. And this is the survivor tree. It is a calorie pear related to the Bradford pear. And it's not a very desirable species. It's an invasive species. Many states now prevent you from growing this tree because it is so invasive, but it is a very tough urban tree. And that's probably the reason why it's one of the few living things that came out of the destruction of this site. That tree in 2012 was transplanted, dug out, and moved up to a park in northern Manhattan, up in the Bronx. And that tree grew there for the next 10 years or so, 9 years, and they reestablished a crown on that tree. So when it came time to complete the plaza, it became the centerpiece, much to the chagrin of the landscape architects. This is not a very desirable species. And the landscape architects, as well as all the arborists, were kind of horrified that they would put a Bradford pear or calorie pear in its place. It's a little bit like designing a multi-million-dollar home and placing a picture of dogs playing poker in the foyer. All right, it's just not very acceptable. But nevertheless, The public has responded to this tree in a big way. There's books written about it. Students will come there and write poems about it. They'll write notes about it. I've seen many, many pieces of correspondence that came into the city of New York to explain how to better care for this tree. And there's some real creative ways of caring for trees, I can tell you. So this is the tree on site. Flowers prolifically every spring. It produces a lot of fruit. These are children who are looking at it. It gets a lot of attention, a lot of critiques. It also produces a lot of fruit. That is the invasive nature of this tree. But someone got the bright idea that these fruit would germinate. You can have seedlings, and you too can have your own seedling from the survivor tree. So some people with the city of New York at first propagated this, figuring they might give them away, but the project became much too large. So what we did with that program, Bartlett took it over, and we co-sponsored the program with John Bowne High School, which is a high school in Queens, New York, that is an agricultural high school. It's been there for over 100 years. And this is a magnet school where some of these students come from all 5 boroughs of New York City, and they study agriculture. And they've taken on the project of growing and distributing these trees with help from some of the Bartlett arborists. So they're actually propagating these trees, growing them, and these are being distributed to sites where there have been other tragedies, especially those that occurred due to terrorism. So Newtown, Connecticut, the shootings there, Las Vegas, the shootings there, Charleston, you're probably aware of that, but also abroad, Christchurch, New Zealand, Oslo, Paris, Manchester. These trees are being requested and shipped there as a memorial tree to those sites that also have endured tragedy. So this has become a very successful program. Unfortunately, it is a calorie pair, but it is what it is. And although arborists and landscape architects might be horrified of it, the general public doesn't understand the significance of it. They appreciate this tree. Okay, there's actually been studies done on people's perception of the survivor tree, and generally it's very positive. So here is the completed site now. This is right at opening day. There has been a memorial glade that has been added to it, and the memorial glade is to the victims of the cleanup of the site. So you've probably heard that many of the people who worked on the cleanup of the site developed diseases. They developed, many of them developed cancers and so forth. Many of them have passed away. So they put a memorial to the workers who actually cleaned up this site. And this is an addition that was completed around 2019, 2020. So the memorial glade is in addition to that site. Tree maintenance is an ongoing. Bartlett still 10 years after planting, Bartlett still is actively involved in maintaining that site. That is rebid every couple of years, and Bartlett has been the successful bidder on that. We do have some disease issues in there. We're getting our hands around that. Some new treatments available, so hopefully we won't lose any trees from this disease that has been affecting them. There's also been some issues with the water. It's being treated for. It's all reclaimed water, heavily treated water, and there were some issues with trees being exposed to the fountain water and developing some health issues. And again, we got our hands around that and not losing any trees there. So here's the plants that how they looked when they first went on site. This is a few years later. This is one of the 2000 and the memorial anniversaries. September 11th anniversary some year afterwards. You can see there's beginning to get some crown closure on the trees. This is a more recent photograph, probably taken 2-3 years ago. And you can see we're getting complete crown closure. Here we have literally a complete forest of trees in there now. So the canopies are growing together. There's complete shade on this site now. So what was envisioned as a forest of trees when the design was developed is literally a forest of trees today. So if you visit the site, it is a total crown closure, and trees are performing extremely well. Add a lot to this site. This is the Freedom Tower. It's 1,776 feet tall. I'm not sure how they arrived at that number, but that's the size of it. You can see this is the centerpiece. There's about 7 or 8 buildings that have been redesigned there. But the bottom floors, you can see, look different than the glass panels up above. That's basically solid concrete. They designed this so that it's going to withstand any type of bombing. So they knew that by creating this centerpiece tower, that it was going to be a target, and it was designed to withstand any terrorist attack, probably short of crashing another plane into it. But it was redesigned. It was designed with the thought that it's going to survive anything that terrorists might throw at it. What you see on the left there, that's the new transit station. That's the Oculus. So there's been a lot of criticism about the Plaza Memorial. The whole Plaza Museum, the whole memorial cost close to $1 billion. That's not the trees. That's mostly the memorial, the plaza, and the museum. It was close to $1 billion. But that Oculus, the transit station, is close to $4 billion. So just give you some perspective on the redesign and the costs on the redesign. The plaza, the memorial, and the museum were relatively small compared to some of the other aspects of this. And certainly the memorial is now one of the major tourist attractions in Manhattan. It rates quite high, mostly because it's free. But even the museum, which is an expense, is widely visited. Okay, so that's the Freedom Tower at night. It's a spectacular place at night. Here are the fountains at night. Again, very spectacular to visit in the dusk. So I probably went over by a few minutes. I did. If there is a few minutes for discussion or talk, I'll be glad to handle any questions that I can.
That's terrific. My thanks again, Bruce. I just find the whole thing fascinating, but the fact that these trees are doing so well is such a tribute to you guys and just to life itself. Literally, it's very optimistic to me in terms of what y'all have done and what's there now, doing so well under these such unusual circumstances. So let's take some questions or comments. If folks can put them in the chat, that would be great. And Caitlin can help me with that. Wish to come on screen and try to ask through Zoom, we certainly can do that for a few minutes too. So some questions for Bruce?
Easy group.
Easy group. So all, that survivor tree, have literally all of those seedlings come from the original?
Yes, and there's a lot of emphasis right now on propagating it clonally. So there is a lot of interest. It is a seedling, it's open grown seedling. So the genetics of that tree is identical to the parent tree because it is open grown. So a lot of interest right now in propagating it clonally and cloning that. So we're doing some work with that right now and looking at either through cuttings or through grafting, clonally propagating it. There is a great deal of interest. There's numerous requests that come in every year for seedlings from that.
That's fascinating. Well, we got a question in the chat. Are there any contingency trees being cultivated somewhere in case there are trees that need to be replaced at the site?
No longer. So initially there was a holdover about 10%. It was less than that. It was about 5% holdover. No trees were lost during this whole process. They weren't needed. Most of those contingency plants that were being grown in container by 2011 were outgrowing their containers. So the year following, all the extras were sent to Shanksville, Pennsylvania. So the sweet gum, the remaining oaks that were still present in container was shipped out to Shanksville and used at that location. So there wasn't really a way to hold them in container. We held them in container way too long. So they were ready to be planted out when we did plant them out. And there's really not a good way to get large trees back in there on site without craning them into place. There's no way to get equipment across that plaza to put in a large tree. So any thought process to replanting trees is going to be with small trees. What's probably going to happen is those trees that die will probably remain vacant. This is going to evolve like a forest does. And as trees grow in size, the genetically inferior ones are going to get shaded out. They're going to get left behind. They're going to get suppressed. They're eventually going to die or be removed. So this is going to mature into fewer trees, but larger trees. So it's going to mature like a forest does. And I think we're going to see some losses inevitably in the future. But I don't think they're going to be missed the way this is designed. That the trees that are remaining will fill in that space from the trees that go missing.
Yeah, nicely said. Another question came in. Is the school, that school you mentioned that's helping with the selling, where did the proceeds go?
It's an amazing school. The trees that are being grown for distribution are given away. So there's no money that exchange hands. Bartlett's funding the materials and so forth. The students are providing labor. Any materials they need is being funded through Bartlett. So it's a good situation. These students every year, they're between their sophomore and junior year, their project is they each get a plot of land, which is in Queens, New York. It's not far from LaGuardia, Kennedy Airport. And they get a plot of land and they grow vegetables on that plot of land during the summertime. And there is a booth out front of the school that they sell these vegetables, and they have to keep track of what they produced, how much weight it is, what it's sold for, and they've got to account for it. And this is a very popular farm stand in Queens. You have to see it to believe it. If you're not energized by being around these kids are in there at early in the morning and they're in there after school, and they are so engaged with it. If you met the instructors, you'd know why. The instructors are all graduates of this program. They went on to Cornell, most of them, and got their degree in ag education, but all of them went through this program. And if you can't come out and be energized from being around these kids, you need a pulse. It's just amazing what they do. So
we need a sister school agreement with
it is the most fun.
The very big timber and ag area here where we are in and around Swainsboro, Statesboro. So that you've given some food for thought there. We could learn something from them, and maybe they could learn something from the folks around here.
Yeah, they have an active FFA program, Future Farmers of America. There's an active chapter. They often win in their competitions at the FAA competitions. So you would never expect it out of literally a school surrounded by concrete.
That's wild.
They do have agricultural fields. Most schools have ball fields. They don't. They have ag fields.
Makes sense. Are there any other questions for Bruce on anything? Okay. Well, I just want to so thank you again for doing this, for helping us. So thankful for your time and your insight here. And we just want to say thanks on behalf of East Georgia State College. Hope you'll consider joining us again, or if you're in the area, please come by so we can show you the memorial tree that we planted this morning, and also show you the area. We'd love to show off Emmanuel County and a lot of the good things around here to you anytime, Bruce.
Well, thanks very much for the invitation. It's always a talk that I enjoy.
Well, so appreciative of your time. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Okay, take care.